Yo, what's up, everyone? So, picture this. It's 1877, and there's this incredibly skilled group of Native American warriors called the Nez Perce who are about to pull off one of the most epic fighting retreats in American history. We're talking about outmaneuvering the entire U.S. Army for over 1,000 miles while protecting their families. This is the story of Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce War, and honestly, it's one of the most tragic but impressive military campaigns you've probably never heard about. Let's dive in. All right, so let's set the scene here. Blue flowers were growing along the edge of the rivers where Nez Perce children played and elders talked. But the days of traditional gatherings on this stretch of prairie were coming to an end. These bands of Nez Perce people were making what would be their last ride into exile, and here's how it all went down. Back in 1855, there was a treaty that established the legal right of the Nez Perce to basically all of their ancestral territory. They had it in writing that this was their land. But then in 1860, Euro-Americans discovered gold in the region, and that's when everything went sideways. Piece by piece, thousands of prospectors and miners just plodded up and started carving up the earth. Their booming towns anticipated this never-ending migration of settlers who just staked out homes, farms, and ranches in direct violation of the treaty. The Nez Perce had been steadfast allies of the United States and really didn't want to retaliate, so they kept pleading for some kind of diplomatic resolution. But here's what the government did instead. Being careful to keep the gold mines and settlements to themselves, government representatives drew up completely new borders in 1863 and convinced certain cooperative Nez Perce leaders to sign a treaty giving up about 90% of their people's land. 90%, dude. The wise Chief Joseph of the Wallowa Valley compared this to learning that your neighbor just sold away all your horses without even asking your permission. The thing is, the Nez Perce were composed of these semi-autonomous bands, and none of them actually had the authority to speak for all the others. Commissioners from the U.S. government even admitted as much back in 1873, saying, "If any respect is to be paid to the laws and customs of the Indians, then the Treaty of 1863 is not binding upon Joseph and his band." But no such respect was ever paid. While many Nez Perce lived on a reservation, the outlying bands led by Joseph, Tulhulzo, Looking Glass, and Whitebird stayed peacefully on their homelands. It was only now in 1877 that the military threat from General Oliver Otis Howard forced them to head toward the reservation. Not everyone could handle that kind of surrender, though. One night, a few young Nez Perce men started thinking about all the horrible things their people had suffered over the years. Trespassing settlers had stolen their cattle and horses, killed their men, assaulted their women, crimes that were basically overlooked by the American justice system. These three furious young warriors rode out to avenge the death of a relative. They hit several homes and killed multiple men, then rallied 16 more Nez Perce warriors. The next night, these raiders brutally attacked men, women, and children, killing around 15 settlers total. Chief Joseph, who was away from camp during the raids, would later condemn their actions and reflect, "Our young men were quick-tempered, and I've had great trouble in keeping them from doing rash things. I know that my young men did a great wrong." Yet the actions of just a few had basically turned the entire military against all of them. General Howard sent over 100 men toward a canyon where most of the Nez Perce had moved their camp. As some Nez Perce approached under a white flag to negotiate, one of the U.S. volunteers just straight up shot at them. American soldiers dismounted and advanced toward the camp, and then the grassy hills erupted with war cries. About 60 Nez Perce sharpshooters emerged and started hitting kill shots, strategically targeting trumpeters and officers to break American cohesion. In the long retreat that followed, the winding canyons were littered with dead soldiers. The Americans lost over 30 men, without killing a single Nez Perce warrior. These guys were seriously capable fighters. They had well-bred Appaloosa horses, organized their maneuvers with signals, would embolden themselves with taunts and songs, and since they didn't have reliable access to ammunition, their gunners had learned to be extremely accurate with every single shot. Howard, fearing that others would join Joseph in defiant bands, ordered the arrest of the neutral chief Looking Glass and his people. Villagers fled as U.S. cavalry attacked, plundered their homes, and stole 600 horses. That shattered any remaining neutrality. In early July, Looking Glass and his band joined Joseph and the others, joined by some Palouse allies. The combined group numbered roughly 800 people, around 250 of whom were men of fighting age. The caravan held off an attack by Howard, then vanished into the treacherous Bitterroot Range of the Rockies. So now we've got this incredible journey beginning. After arranging safe passage with local troops, this miles-long column cut through mountains and into the Bitterroot Valley. We're talking about 800 people with all their food, teepees, and weapons carried by 2,000 horses. Some Nez Perce had periodically trekked across these mountains for bison hunts and had built alliances with indigenous peoples of the Great Plains. Looking Glass assured his fellow chiefs that they could journey east and find help among the Crow, with whom some Nez Perce had once fought side by side against the Sioux. Interestingly enough, Lewis and Clark had come through this same route 7 decades earlier. The Nez Perce had actually fed those starving Americans, and on the way home, the expedition stayed with them for over a month, during which time the peoples pledged friendship. That hospitality was clearly not being returned now. The Nez Perce continued their journey, and their scouts knew Howard would be weeks behind their trail. What they didn't know was that frontier forts all across the United States had been summoned to intercept them. The band set up their teepees at the foot of a tall slope along the Big Hole River. That night, over 100 American forces crept close enough, they later admitted, to hear dogs barking and Nez Perce babies crying. Just before dawn on August 9th, the soldiers advanced with instructions to aim low into the teepees to kill people as they slept. They opened fire on the fleeing Nez Perce. A boy hiding in the nearby stream with his mother later recalled. One little girl held her arm up from the cold water. It was a big bullet hole. I could see through it. The Nez Perce warriors struck back hard, killed many attackers, and pushed them back to the woods. A lengthy sniping battle covered the retreat of the Nez Perce caravan. The Americans had managed to kill 60 to 90 Nez Perce, including many women and children. 6 of the attackers would later receive medals of honor for this massacre. The shaken Nez Perce questioned the military leadership of Looking Glass, but it was actually he who, 10 days later, led an attack directly on Howard's camp, stealing over 100 mules and horses. Having failed again to capture his targets, Howard was getting exhausted, and he was even criticized by the commanding general of the Army, William T. Sherman, for his lack of results. The Nez Perce trekked ahead into stranger territory. Some knew it as the land of the burning ground, what we now call Yellowstone National Park. This was the ruins of a supervolcano that hadn't truly erupted in 600,000 years, where geysers still sparked and wildlife once roamed freely. But the forest now stood much quieter. Animals along the frontier had been trapped, shot, and poisoned. General Sherman actually wrote with satisfaction that the sudden depopulation of animals had starved Native Americans from their homelands, clearing the land for settlement and industry. Over the next 2 weeks, the main caravan took tourist parties captive to cover their whereabouts before releasing them with food and directions. But small bands of Nez Perce warriors, furious over the massacre at Big Hole, broke off and attacked several tourists, much to Chief Joseph's condemnation. Looking Glass made contact with the Crow, who declined his request for help. They wouldn't risk defying the United States. A last hope lay far north. After his triumph at Little Bighorn a year ago, Lakota Chief Sitting Bull and some of his followers had fled to Canada, which was only patrolled by mounted police who lacked the power to extradite armed indigenous warriors. White Bird had long advocated that the Nez Perce seek refuge with Sitting Bull, and the Council of Chiefs now agreed. The prospect of such an alliance had occurred to Howard, but General Philip Sheridan assured him the idea was ridiculous. While Howard trailed the Nez Perce, additional forces under Colonel Sturgis moved to cut them off. Threading through the jagged Clark's Fork Canyon, the Nez Perce then climbed the Great Rock Walls, had their horses mill in a circle to hide their trail, and faked going south. Sturgis chased a false trail, only to find that the Nez Perce had cut back north through the canyon and escaped onto plains. Sturgis caught up to them on September 13th, and with help from the Crow managed to capture many horses. But the Nez Perce killed several of his men and escaped into the night. The long days of riding ahead were broken up by fearful nights on the quiet plains. Around Cow Island, the hungry Nez Perce skirmished with soldiers and raided supplies from a steamboat landing and a wagon train. The winds grew cold as they traveled north. The horses were exhausted, the people still grieving. Looking Glass insisted they pitch their tattered tents in the foothills of the Bear Paw Mountains. Over 1,000 miles and 4 months behind them, the Nez Perce sat just 40 miles from the Canadian border. But Colonel Nelson A. Miles, who had defeated bands of Lakota over the last year, had tracked them with a large force reinforced by Cheyenne scouts. On September 30th, Miles' men stormed the camp, fired on defenders, and captured most of the horses. Some Nez Perce managed to flee north, but most were pinned down as warriors traded kills with the enemy, who then established positions around the camp. Among the dead were Tuholzot and Joseph's brother Ollicott. Snow fell that night, covering the corpses of loved ones while the living dug into holes, and warriors kept watch in rifle pits. Artillery pounded the hills. Many hoped that those who fled north would return with Sitting Bull and the Lakota to scatter the Americans. Looking Glass rose to scan the edges of the battlefield for rescuers, and an American soldier shot him in the head. The cold stalemate lasted for days. Howard arrived at Miles' camp late on October 4th. While each side had killed around 25 of the other, the Nez Perce people were suffering badly. The next day, flanked by 5 companions, Chief Joseph rode over the White Hills with his rifle across his lap. He met with Miles and Howard, and it was recorded that he surrendered with these famous words: "I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Tuholzot is dead. The old men are all dead. He who leads the young men is dead. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are. I want time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." White Bird would escape north with some followers, and around 200 total reached Sitting Bull's camp. Joseph and many others could have escaped if they'd been willing to abandon the young, wounded, and elderly, but they weren't. The 400 or so who surrendered at the Battle of Bear Paw did so with the understanding that they'd moved to the Nez Perce Reservation, the remaining sliver of their homeland. But Sherman overruled Miles and sent the prisoners to Indian Territory instead, a bleak spot of land among other removed peoples like the Comanche and Osage. So yeah, that's the tragic but incredible story of the Nez Perce War of 1877. Days after the war ended, the New York Times actually published an opinion saying the war was an unpardonable and frightful blunder, a crime against the Nez Perce. The belief that they'd been cheated and unjustly hunted wasn't some later revisionist take. It was actually a prevailing view among Americans even back then. Chief Joseph became a national figure, delivering speeches in the Capitol and pleading to return to his homeland. He died on the Colville Reservation in 1904, never achieving that dream. Stay curious about history. Everyone, peace out.